The internet was originally developed so that researchers at different universities could communicate and collaborate on important information with each other.
Okay, I love a good peer review process. Anything worth its salt, or sugar, I guess, should be reviewed. Honestly, I take this opportunity to respond as a compliment. We both know why you're here, so I'm just gonna get into it. The video states that you may not want to try this hack because, quote, it's not working due to the reasons given in the video. It is working because you're just knocking all of the air out of the frosting. Now, the underlying concept one has to understand before making such a simplistic statement is emulsions. Two liquids that don't want to mix, like oil and water. They have physical properties at the molecular level that prevents them from combining easily. Here's a schematic approximation of butter at the droplet level. You've got butter fat, which accounts for about 80% of the volume. Then you've got moisture, which is water with various proteins inside at around 20% of the volume. Then you've got some air pockets. Butter is what's called a water in oil emulsion because the butter fat is spread throughout with water droplets isolated inside. And it's pretty well understood that all dairy is very complex. You have all these molecular components interacting with each other inside this emulsion. Now, by extension, buttercreams are also a water and oil emulsion. Adding egg whites and things like sugar syrups, of course, increases the complexity of things. Now, the debunking video says that it's just air and not any of the emulsive properties that I was talking about. So let's remove that variable by using American buttercream, which is an aerated buttercream that's not an emulsion. Therefore, removing all the air should increase color saturation. Okay, for every frosting sample in this video, I'm using 200 grams, and I'm adding approximately 0.2 of a gram of food dye. I'm going to mix with my hand mixer on medium-high speed for 30 seconds, remove some to the plate where I have my undyed buttercream for comparison, then immersion blend for another 30 seconds, remove some to the plate, and then re-whip on medium-high speed for 30 seconds to take the final sample. And notice how the color change is kind of the same across the board. The presence or lack of aeration has a minimal effect on the color. So maybe it's the fact that I used gel food color, which is water-based. To double check, I used oil-based food coloring, which is soluble in the butter. Again, use the immersion blender to knock out all the air for 30 seconds, and we'll see after re-whipping, again, the color change is minimal. And this was unintentionally proved in the debunking video. Curiously, American buttercream was the one chosen to display that re-whipping gets it back to its initial color, but what was instead demonstrated was the lack of color change. And I'm really hoping that American buttercream was just chosen for another reason, other than if Swiss meringue buttercream was chosen like what was used in the beginning of the video, another result would be more evident. So here's Swiss meringue buttercream, and I followed the exact protocol I went over earlier. So we've got undyed buttercream that's white, then after mixing, it's a light blue. After the immersion blender, it's more saturated, and after mixing, you get a slightly lighter shade. And almost any other buttercream could have been chosen other than straight American buttercream. This is my American Dreamy buttercream that I converted to an emulsion. So here's the buttercream when color pigment is added. It spreads a little, but when the immersion blender is homogenizing, the water and the meringue interspersed within the butterfat become more evenly sized and evenly spaced, including the reduction of air bubbles. This allows the color pigment to reach more water, making the buttercream appear more saturated. Now to address volume loss. Air pockets are inside butters and therefore buttercream, especially during whipping. And loss of aeration is something I've addressed on every video on every platform I've posted. I also let bakers know it's more creamy and dense and more substantial than a regular buttercream. But is the volume loss significant? The debunking video shows an initial volume of 700 mils, which after blending goes down to around 450 mils. That's around a 37% loss of volume. So to cross-check this one, I added 200 grams of Swiss meringue buttercream to my beaker. Then I recorded the initial volume, also using tape, and used the immersion blender and recorded the final volume. And I measured the mass before and after the blending to account for most of all the frosting. And it's hard to control all the variables, particularly with taking the volume of frosting. So I did another kind of sample where I took the initial volume of the buttercream, then I melted the buttercream completely for 20 seconds in the microwave and used the immersion blender. That way I melted all the butterfat, removing all of the air pockets, and then I took the same before and after volume measures. And when there's variation like this, it's a good idea to get a bigger sample size. So that's what I did. 3 samples using just the immersion blender and 3 more samples using both heat and the immersion blender, recording weights for every step. And I did this with a singular beaker for each sample. The results are that my volume loss averaged at around 16%, less than half of the reported volume from the debunking video. This also kind of matches up with the experiment I did in 2021 where I showed that melting buttercream in the microwave slightly decreases the volume. So while there might be different levels of understanding regarding how this works, the purpose of all this was to answer the question, does it work? Not only is the answer yes, and that the volume loss is not as significant as the debunking video reported, the underlying cause is more directly related to the emulsive properties and not, quote, just knocking all the air out of the frosting, unquote. Using an oversimplified explanation to address a complex scientific phenomenon seems to be serving other priorities in the debunking video rather than the baking community for which my original video was intended. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be skeptical of things posted on YouTube. You absolutely should. Science is all about wondering, exploring novel concepts, and about asking questions when you don't know. And because the quality of information online is always in question, the onus on scientists who create content as scientists is to add knowledge to the best of our ability. And that's just it. If something is not understood, you read or research or collaborate or ask. I have yet to find one scientist, including myself, that does not like to talk about their work. Maybe we'll find the answer together or come up with something new. This is much more ethical than making under-researched and malformed conclusions at the expense of others' work purely for entertainment and not science.